Allison, if you want to hit the record button. All right, great. And let's see. Hold on. Okay, great. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Colleen Cooley. For my Diné relatives, I'll introduce myself in my language first. Yat e, she Colleen Cooley and Nishya, Kenya ani Nishla, look at Diné bushes chin, twat heglini e dishacheg, lizatlana e dishanella, shant twahodan do bisto is nadeshki dant nasha, and quote out a asta Nishla. And I want to translate that for those that are not Diné. My name is Colleen Cooley. I am of the Towering House clan, born for the Reed People clan, originally from two small communities in northern Arizona, Blue Gap and Shanto, Arizona. And this is a discussion that we're going to have around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what that looks like in the outdoors and ways that you all can support it. You might already be doing some of those initiatives within your own organization or your business or your companies. And this kind of stemmed from an earlier panel back in June that I also helped organize. And it's called Beyond the Pandemic because I know some of these issues were sort of became more aware during the pandemic, but we have been dealing with some of these issues and trying to address them before the pandemic. We're going to continue to be, we're going to continue to address those issues as well, even after this conversation, even after the pandemic as well. And so, the first conversations was with a panel of women from that have really connection experience working in the Grand Canyon, and it was discussing Indigenous people's rights and the history to that place, because a lot of visitors are not aware of the connections that we have and the stories that we have to that place. And there's not many Indigenous people that work in the canyon, whether they're guides, but they still, you know, have a connection and a story to that place. So we wanted to, so the second panel here, I've invited 4 individuals that have started initiatives or are working for programs that are advocating for being more diverse and equitable and inclusive within the outdoor industry. Because sometimes we're just kind of invited to some of these panels or maybe a seminar here and there, but that relationship is not maintained. And so I wanted to have them discuss, you know, a little bit more about their work and why they started what they are currently doing. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'll pass it over to the panelists to introduce themselves to get started. So I'll start off with Sergio.
Gracias, Colleen. Buenas tardes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here and thank you for the invitation, Colleen. My name is Sergio Avila. I use pronouns he, him, and I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui peoples in what's currently known as Tucson, Arizona. With this acknowledgement, I also want to say that both Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui people, their land is divided by an arbitrary international border that is now and has been under assault for many years, you could say centuries. They have existed and lived in these lands since before those boundaries were drawn on the ground. And today they are working to defend their land, their water, and their ancestors and their culture. It is a privilege to be here, and I'm very honored to share the panel with everybody. My background is in conservation biology. I am originally from Mexico. I am an immigrant from Mexico. I am also a trail runner. I'm also a scientist, and I am employed by the Sierra Club. And I will be happy to talk about conservation, diversity, equity, and recreation issues in the outdoors, how I personally navigate my own identity and working with other communities, as well as working with a mainstream conservation organization, old and large. So thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Great, thank you. I'll pass it on over to Verna.
Yeah, I am Verna Volker, I'm currently here in Minneapolis, Minnesota with 6 to 8 inches of snow. I'm originally from the Nahiłii area and have been living here in the Minneapolis area for 12 years. I am a mother of 4 kids ranging from the ages of 17 to 8. Currently, I teach 2nd grade, and I am the founder of Native Woman Running. I have been running for the last like over 10 years, and I founded Native Woman Running, and we are over 2.5 years old to bring visibility to Indigenous women runners all across, Turtle Island, now currently all over the world, because there's natives everywhere. So, and also just to bring the light of positivity and encouragement to break down stereotypes of who we are, and just to encourage each other along the way as we are all on different running journeys. So that's me. So thank you so much for inviting me here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for making some time to be here with us. And I'll pass it over to Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith Marroquin. I'm from Tucson, Arizona, and currently residing in Tucson, Arizona. From 1988 until 2018, I worked as a raft guide down in Grand Canyon. Actually, probably from 1994. My first trips in 1988 were all science-related trips down in Grand Canyon. And then from 1994, 95, I worked as a professional raft guide down in Grand Canyon until 2018. I've been a nurse doing critical care for a number of years, and now I work as a nurse proudly out at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Tucson. And that's about it. I've worked as a raft guide full-time down in Grand Canyon from the mid-90s until the mid-2000s, doing 6 to 8 trips a year down there, turning people on to that incredible experience that is a Grand Canyon River trip. And, then from probably 2005 until 2018, I was doing about 2 or 3 trips a year down there, and that's about it. I'm very happy to be here, excited for this conversation, and thank you all for coming.
Great, thank you. Somebody mentioned that it was a little hard to hear you, so maybe go a little bit closer for the next question to your computer. All right, and then we have Nizhooni.
Gat everyone, I'm Nizhooni. Kintlachitni Diné and Nishle Nake Nahiłii Dash E Bashichin Dashiche Dashinale as well. And that's my introduction. I'm Nizhooni, and my maternal clan is Kintlachitni. We're the Red House people, and I'm born for the African American. I love the term Nahiłii. It just warms my soul. And for those who don't know what that means, it means something along the lines of those who have come from across, who have dark calmness, who have overcome and persevered, and are in unity, in oneness. And that is a word that I use to describe myself as a Black person living in Navajo world. And that's something that is very, very important to my identity, something that I'm continually thinking and learning about. And I'm born and raised in Denver, Colorado, but my family is from all over, including, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on my grandma's hometown, but we're from the eastern side of the reservation. And from the New Mexico side. I'm a recent graduate of Colorado College. I just recently graduated with a bachelor's in environmental studies, and I work for Environmental Learning for Kids that's based here in Denver, in far northeast Denver. Very, very important to mention that because we are primarily a Black and Brown neighborhood, and so we focus a lot on making sure that under-resourced youth have the opportunity to have some sort of access to the natural world, whether that's through outdoor recreation or it's through mainly environmental science, environmental programs, and leadership cultivation. That's me.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you for explaining the Nahiłii. I wasn't really aware of that too. I think Redmilla Cody had explained it at one point, I think on her Facebook as well. And that's really beautiful. Thank you.
My queen.
Thank you. So for those that are tuning in, we have people from all over, from the Southwest, Northwest, I think even from other outside the country as well, from Greenland. So welcome everybody. We're just having you all mention where you're tuning in from, but we also have a poll question. Our first question, if Allison can pull that up, is finding out a little bit more about who you all are tuning in. So the first one is, do you identify as BIPOC? And that's, yeah, yes or no. Oh, I did not want to pull all these questions up, actually. Actually, Allison, if you can close it, I don't know if we can separate the questions out. Maybe she can work on that. So, but yeah, I think I wanted to go into, while she's trying to figure that out, we wanted to get to know you all a little bit more. But one of the questions, another question I wanted you all to, let's see, kind of start off with is, what is diversity? And I have this, because it can go, there's a lot of different ways it can be explained. I think we have our own ways of defining it. And so, I don't know, Allison, if you have that link to that poll, if you can share that within the chat box. But here it is, this first one. So we can activate. And so what you can do is you can either go to the link listed, hopefully it's in the chat box, that you can click on it. And then also you can use your phone and text it. So we just want to kind of get an idea, like it can be just one word, several words. You can maybe put it in the chat box as well. But once we have people starting to fill it out, it will show up here. So it might take a little bit for you all to figure out. But yeah, we want to start with that. What is diversity? What does that mean? What does that mean to you? How do you connect with it? Rather than just us telling you what we think as well. Kind of want to start off with you all first. Yeah, wow, strength and beauty. Great. Mosaic. Kind of just getting an understanding of how you view it. Perspectives. So what happens if people are typing in, I think the same word, I think it gets bigger within the word cloud. So many and perspectives. Great. I have a lot of different words here. I'm gonna take a photo of it. All right, just give you a few more seconds to respond. Okay, it says it's full. So yeah, we have a lot of different words to describe what diversity is from your viewpoint. So voice, perspectives, collection, representation, variety, truth, liberation, experience, respecting. These are all great. And I think this will go into what the panelists will have to share. Thank you all for participating in this. So I'm going to turn it over to the panelists and have them talk about maybe a little bit more about their experience. I think Verna kind of talked about why she started Native Woman Running, but maybe you can delve in a little bit deeper about, you know, what you saw and why there was a need for diversity and inclusion in running. And yeah, I think I'll start with that.
Well, I'm a pretty, I always say new runner, but I've been running just over 10 years. And a lot of Native people are basically born running. Some of us started later in life. But in the last couple of years, I noticed social media, you could actually have a community on there and post your runs. And that's how I started getting a following. As I got more into the sport of running, I noticed one time at a Barnes and Noble, I picked up some magazines that had to do with trail running and had to do with ultra running and Runner's World. And each of them had photos of the status quo runner, you know, the cute blonde girl who runs, or who just ran Boston, who's holding a baby, and those kind of things that resonate with me as an Indigenous mother. I've struggled with my weight. And so, you know, looking at that, it didn't really make me feel like I felt a belonging. And especially here, when I'm being here in Minneapolis and being a trail runner, I'm usually only the one who is like the brown face, I guess, in the running community here. So as I started to search on social media, I noticed even so, like the main page had really the typical status quo runner. And I had a Native woman like following already. And so I just asked a few of them if they would be interested in an account if I created it. And many said yes. And it has grown over like 14,000, because I feel like a lot of times as Native people, we are looked at in a very negative way, or we're looked at in the past. And I just wanted to share Native women who are doing amazing things all across the world, who are balancing out life, but who are mothers and who are running Boston, or who ran 100 miles, or who are just even simply running 5K or getting back into that. I feel like they should all be celebrated, and that they should find this space. And oftentimes I say, this is our land, like all around us. And I feel like Native women and Indigenous people in general, like we should have that, we should feel a part of that land because it belongs to us. And so finding that space for these women to feel like they find a belonging. And I've gotten a lot of messages of women saying they're so happy they found a place here because they feel a sense of belonging. And I think that's why we feel like, I feel like we should be celebrated, because, you know, we're always taught as women, that Indigenous women, that we're strong and resilient. And I think running has really played a key role with Native women runners in healing and just grieving and a lot of things. I feel like it's been such a wonderful thing that has happened. And I could say I'm just so proud of all the women who accomplish what they do. And so I hope that that continues, because when you think of the whole population in the United States of Native people, you know, they say like we're 2% or less than 2%. Even I'm sure the percentage is so low in running in regards to that, like how much we're represented. So, but yeah, that's just kind of how it has grown. And I'm really happy that I could help these women, their stories get out there and let people know, and the running industry know, that these women they should be represented too in a positive way.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to share an image that Verna had shared on her, oops, wrong one. let's see, hold on. That Verna had shared on her social media a while back. Oh, yes, that's the right one. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yes, I do. I saw this girl plenty of times on the right side in the runner's world who all over social media, in magazines. And when you look at that type, as from my perspective as a Native woman runner, I don't look that fit. Or you have these ideas like what a runner should look like, that we should be a flawless and muscular. And I was just kind of making a comparison that even as me, as a person, a mother, that we should be represented in a positive way like that, that running belongs to us too, not just the beautiful, flawless white girl. And so I think that was why I did it, that representation of not just me, but Indigenous women matters. Whatever shape and size they are should be celebrated and represented in major companies. And I hope that major companies not only see like one runner, but that they will see that this belongs to everybody, that everyone could be part of this and included in that.
Yes, that, and I wanted to share this and show you all this because that really resonated with me, that you don't have to look a certain way to enjoy being outside. You know, I think that's kind of portrayed sometimes, or have, you know, the latest gear or the latest backpack or shoes, you know, it's for us, it's, you know, connecting to the outdoors in a different way. And so I think with that, I wanted to turn it over to Keith, and kind of if you can sort of share your experience as a former guide down in the Grand Canyon, and why do you think that, you know, you were one of the only, you know, people of color working down in the canyon? And I want to share an image here in a little bit, and you can maybe explain that a little bit further. And your story around that. And it's still, you know, it's still hard, I think, difficult for people of color, Indigenous, Black, Brown people to get up into those kind of positions to be a guide, because you need a certification, you need to train, you need to, you know, have an in with a certain company, I think, as far as I understand. And so what I see, I think part of what I see as a barrier is the mentorship, or somebody as a role model to look up to that looks like you, to be able to get to becoming a guide down in the canyon. So Keith, if you want to share a little bit about your experience down there.
Sure. Let's see. So I came to working down in Grand Canyon sort of in a pretty circuitous way. So
Can you speak up just a little bit?
I came to working down in Grand Canyon in a pretty roundabout way. Can you guys hear me? Yes? You guys hear me?
I can. I'm not sure about the audience, if he needs to speak up or not. Maybe turn up your volumes.
I'll try to turn them up, but okay. So like I said, I came to working as a guide down in Grand Canyon in a pretty roundabout way. So in 1988, I volunteered for a science trip down in Grand Canyon, and it was a USGS trip where they were doing sediment collection down there. And the experience, I had never been to the Grand Canyon. I'd never been on a river before. And that experience literally changed my life. I fell in love with the place. It wasn't the people necessarily. It wasn't anything about the guiding down there. I didn't even know you could be a river guide down there, really. I just fell in love with the place. And after that, I just sort of followed my heart. So I went and got my EMT at one of the community colleges here. And I was hired by a company in West Virginia. And I learned how to be a paddle guide out in West Virginia. And so the way I ended up guiding down in Grand Canyon is I was not part of that community in any way. And I think most people nearly everyone that works down there, it's a factor of who you know. And for me, I just was in the right place at the right time. And I was at the warehouse of one of the rafting companies there, and they were in dire need of a guide, and I had the experience that they needed. And I literally left the next day on a Grand Canyon River trip as a baggage boatman. And in that role, I did apparently a good job, so much so that they hired me back. And then from that point on, I started working down there. And I think it's important to say that I noticed right off the bat that I was the only person of color, for the most part, that I saw down there working. And in the 10 years that I was working down there full time, there were maybe 2 or 3 of us and that were working down there that were people of color. And we knew who we were. Like, we were excited to see each other when we ran into each other down there. And a big part of that is because it's just nice to see other people that look like you, basically, down there. And so that's how I ended up working down there in that way.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Keith had shared an image with us. Let's see, I had it up earlier. If you can share a little bit about that, that would be great. Here, hold on. There it is.
Okay. So that was from probably 2017, 2016. There's actually kind of a good story that goes with this image. And the story is that at the beginning of this trip, we were on the ramp at Lee's Ferry, and there were a few other rafting companies that were rigging their trips, and there was a private company that was putting their, or a private trip that was putting their trip together. And I was standing on the back of the truck while we were unloading, and I was looking around the ramp, and I noticed that I was the only person of color on the ramp. And there were probably 60 or 70 people working, getting their trips together. And not only that, I noticed that just everyone on the ramp, they were all dressed the same. They all pretty much looked the same. I didn't see really any diversity in terms of the way people looked or presented themselves, which is not like any other place that I've ever lived or worked, essentially. I just really noticed how homogenous the entire group looked. And I brought that point up with my coworkers on the ramp. I said, do you guys notice anything? Do you guys notice anything about this group of people? And, you know, no one noticed the same things that I noticed on the ramp. And anyway, to make a long story short, I brought that topic up again while we were having dinner. And my comments were either sort of ignored or they were sort of dismissed, that yeah, I was just being oversensitive, or that I was bringing up something that didn't really have a lot of value. And after having worked down there for 25 years at that point, and noticing the disparity amongst especially the guides down there, in terms of there being a lack of cultural diversity, and a lot of people share the same stories down there, if that makes any sense. And those stories, most of them are very different from my story, how I was brought up, and in the life path that I took to be able to get down there working as a guide. And so I felt like the point I was trying to bring up at dinner was ignored or dismissed. And just by complete luck, when we got to Phantom Ranch, the Jim Dandy Ski Club from Detroit, Michigan hiked down, and they're the oldest Black outdoor club in the country, and they do trips all over the world. And these folks came down the trail and climbed in my boat, and I started having the first honest, heartfelt discussion about race and diversity in the outdoors that I'd ever had on a trip ever. And so this is a photograph that was taken of the Jim Dandy Ski Club, some members of them, who were all incredible people and who were fearless in the way they talked about what it's like to be a person of color in the outdoors. And we had these really animated and very vocal conversations that made a lot of people on our trip uncomfortable. We would have these discussions at dinner. And but what was interesting about that in the end is I think a number of the guides on that trip started to see sort of the point that I had been trying to make all these years, that the guide culture down in Grand Canyon lives in a very insular bubble. And that there's not a lot of people there's just not a lot of diversity culturally down in Grand Canyon, if that makes any sense. So that's sort of the long and short of that story.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, and sharing your experience and your stories with guiding. I think a lot of people, not a lot, I think some people of color that work down there might be struggling with some of those same issues that you went through. So I think there needs to be some sort of support system that needs to be put in place, by either the companies themselves or the organizations, and really address some of these kind of real issues to be in that kind of workplace. Anyways, I wanted to turn it over to Nizhooni. And one of the things you had mentioned to me before this panel was like you were working for a program, the Environment Learning for Kids, and that these different outdoor brands have approached and been supportive of the program. But you were like, well, I'm tired of getting backpacks. And I wanted you to maybe explain what you meant by that and a little bit more about the program and what you do.
Well, I can say I do like free gear. It's probably one of my favorite things. Just being a person who's very frugal. But I think something that I came to this summer, just kind of reflecting on a lot of diversity and inclusion initiatives, is that oftentimes, like, I started as an elk youth. We say elk for short. Everybody's a part of the elk family. And I started out as an elk youth, was in the program, and it stemmed from doing an outward bound rafting. I did 16 days rafting and kayaking, and I did not like that I was one of the only Black people there, was one of the only Native people there, and it just made me feel uncomfortable a lot of the times. And so I ran to elk in my neighborhood because I saw that they were making sure that people that look like me had all these opportunities, and even considering careers in the environmental world. And so even with that, I think a lot of elk really does a great job of cultivating us as leaders. We just had some students who are seniors in high school, and they did a TED Talk for Denver, participating with a PhD candidate, and she's very familiar with our program as well, Crystal Cisneros, and it was awesome. And we have all these amazing opportunities and stuff, but I think sometimes, like, you walk away from some of these with just a backpack. I spoke on behalf of, or I spoke for myself, but for Outward Bound's gala event, and I realized it's like, I felt like I was being tokenized, and I asked my friend, my really good colleague, I was like, am I being tokenized? And she said, yeah, but you looked really good up there and you did a good job. And that's just kind of how sometimes we end up in some of these positions, is that we offer so much of ourselves just speaking. And then oftentimes it's like, well, we're so thankful. And I think a lot of times youth and students can pull in money for organizations, but then they're oftentimes just being left with a backpack or a pair of free something where they're like, this is $120 in value. But I think that considering diversity and inclusion, and if that is what people are really, really striving to do, I think that it's more than just a backpack. Like the backpack is good, but I've even been thinking like, I know a lot of people of color where like the backpack is not the thing. Like people can carry a water bottle on a hiking trip, but what do you do about your shoes and stuff? And some students, there are programs where you can get free hiking boots and all of that. And but it's just like there's so many levels to it, I think. And it's even okay, well, now when we get beyond gear, well, what about youth that are seeking or even just barely interested in working in natural resources? Where are these companies going to provide them with working opportunities where now they can get into a career in marketing for a specific brand, or they can be there really working for these companies and organizations? And I feel like I just don't see that enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And yes, it's important to have access to some of that gear, but one of the things that I think about is, well, yeah, it seems it's needed, but the companies that are offering that, it's like, well, now what can you do next, or what can you do further to maintain those relationships with either the programs or the people that work for those programs? And I think, Nizhooni, you had mentioned possibly like hiring those people, the youth that are going through these programs, and that goes back into representation matters in a lot of these different spaces. But before we turn over to Sergio, I think Allison has fixed the poll questions. So for those that are tuning in, we wanted to ask you maybe 2 questions just to get to know our audience a little bit more as well. The first one is, do you identify as BIPOC? And you can just answer yes or no. And if you don't know what that means, then this is a good place and space to learn more about it. Yeah, we'll give it a few seconds. But yeah, we really are thankful for you all tuning in. I think I had posted this morning on Instagram about just my own personal experience, only being the only person of color on some of the trails and stuff. And so it's very real, and it's still, can be a barrier for us. And so, all right, so 41% said yes and 59% said no. So almost half. So thank you for participating in that. And then the second question is just, what do you do for a living, basically, your occupation, affiliation, just to see who's all tuning in. So if we can share that question next, Allison, that would be great. And I know some of us have different roles. We might be multiple, we might be all of these things. I know I have different roles in my own, in what I do. So if it's not listed here, feel free to put it in the chat if you want to share that with everyone, if you feel comfortable with that. We just want to get a sense of who's all tuning in. right. So a lot of educators, some outdoor guides, government employees. Wow, we have a mix of people tuning in. That's great. Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in. We really, really appreciate it. So I want to turn it over to Sergio. I know maybe some of you have seen him on other panels around this topic. And one of the panels I tuned in that he was on, he provided a few quotes that might, be really out there that you might have heard, or maybe you just really weren't aware of. So I wanted to turn it over to him to talk about that and a little bit more about your work as well. Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you, Colleen. A lot of the things that people are sharing here relate to my story. And at the same time, I want to tell each one of you that by you sharing your story and the difficult conversations and the difficult moments, it is a way to learn. It is a way to flex the diversity and equity muscle to learn about it. When we avoid conversations, we are never able to advance to reach the level of conversations that people like Keith needed to have when he was absolutely alone in the river, or Verna absolutely alone in the running world in where she lives. And similarly, I would be willing to ask at least those who don't identify as BIPOC, when have you been the only white person in the room? Think about when you have been the only person in the room. You don't have to share it. We don't have to go into it, but just think, how often does that happen to you and how do you feel about it? Because on the other hand, I have a feeling that for BIPOC, everybody has at least one example this week, and today is Tuesday, of being alone, being the only person of color in the group. So that's just the one thing that I'll start with. So thanks everybody else for sharing. I am going to start with a quote. Thank you for inviting me to read this, Colleen. And I'm not going to tell you who the author is just yet. I will read. So, quote, "A strangely dirty and irregular life these dark-eyed, dark-haired, half-happy savages lead in this otherwise clean wilderness. A strangely dirty and irregular life these dark-eyed, dark-haired, half-happy savages lead in this otherwise clean wilderness." The author of that quote is John Muir. John Muir, known as the father of conservation, as the founder of the organization where I work, the founder of the Sierra Club, known as an advocate for the establishment of national parks. John Muir created a narrative of exclusion and lack of diversity because John Muir had very critical, judgmental things to say about indigenous people in this continent. And so I like to start with this quote because we are talking about a conservationist who loved the natural world. You can see there's a lot of judgment for people, for their color of their hair or their skin or their eyes, and yet wilderness is judged clean, is otherwise clean. And so I am a conservation scientist. I grew up dreaming to be a biologist and to study wildcats and to go to remote areas and try to do research, scientific research that would help us address the conservation of cats. I grew up in a very typical Western education. My parents are college educated. They are both medical doctors. So I grew up surrounded by science, by scientists, by the way of thinking of scientists, by books in English, and by white authors, by a narrative given by somebody else to people where I grew up. So as a conservationist, as a biologist, I followed my career. I went to school, I went to graduate school. I was not accepted in one program. And in that one, let's call it gap year, I took an opportunity to go live in an indigenous community in Mexico of the indigenous group called the Rarámuri or Tarahumara. Many people here might know of the Tarahumara. as the running people in the Sierra Madre of Mexico. They have been profiled in books and different things. They are historically runners, and they live in very, very remote, rugged terrain. When I went there, I did not pretend to be a runner. I did not run with them. I did not engage in that activity, but I could see that for them, that activity was life, was not a sport, was not a thing of the Sundays. It was the way to go visit family, the way to go gather water, the way to go take care of the crops. And that part I participated. So that was one of the first times where my scientist brain and all this Western education kind of clashed and understood a new way that to me made a lot of sense, that to me also spoke very internally of something that I could even remember. I saw where corn came from. I saw where food came from. And as a scientist, from then on, after those 8 months living in a very remote place without water, without electricity, I was recently graduated from college. I brought my new laptop. I brought all my books. I brought my mountain bike. And I remember my Raramuri friends saying, so you're never going to move, right? You're never going to travel because you have to carry all that stuff with you. So that was a way for me to learn that whereas I thought I was living very basic with just the basic needs, for them I had too much if I really wanted to adapt in that way of life. So that was only one experience. I continued having different experiences as a scientist and conservationist in different places in northern Mexico and also in Southwest United States. I was brought to Arizona by the University of Arizona to work in a project with pygmy owls, little tiny owls that live in cavities within saguaros, inside saguaros. And while I came here to work on that, I already spoke English, I already had my degrees, but there was something in the scientific arena here that was not fitting with me. And one was the fact that I was by myself. There was never other scientist of color in what I was doing. And for that, yes, I felt very alone. I also felt very propped up because I had abilities and skills that people admired. But I realized that 20 years down the road, I think that I was being tokenized. I feel that my image was being used by those organizations to say, hey, we have a brown guy and he speaks English and he has a college degree. And so I realized how my identity, I allowed my identity to fit in with that world instead of finding a world where I belong. I remember also working on wilderness designation. And for those not familiar, wilderness is a type of designation of public lands that stems from the Wilderness Act of 1964. It's not that long ago. 1964, my parents were alive. Almost I was alive. And in that wilderness definition, it says, protecting nature untrammeled by men. And so I remember having a lot of conversations with the activists, with the people pushing for wilderness, the experts, those who wrote the books. I was saying, what do you mean untrammeled by men? Like, this is indigenous land. Like, there was indigenous people right here. So I don't understand what untrammeled by men means or why we say that. But to fast forward on that, this is why I bring up that quote from John Muir, because John Muir and people in his time set a narrative for nature and conservation of nature as if nature was protected by removing people from it. And so 130 years later, I come to work with the Sierra Club, with the organization founded by John Muir, that is now trying to acknowledge the history of exclusion of people in nature and support now the communities that have not been in the spot, that have not been heard, that have been ignored, the communities that were removed from the Grand Canyon in order to create that national park. The last year, we celebrated the centennial of the Grand Canyon, but hey, the Grand Canyon has been around for more than 100 years. The Grand Canyon has been around for thousands of years, and people have lived in the Grand Canyon for thousands of years. So we are celebrating only the last 100 when people are not there. So now the Grand Canyon is an empty place where people lost their culture, their food, their water, their language. And they were removed for the rest of us to go enjoy this place. So whenever you think about the Yosemites and the Yellowstones and the Grand Canyons, don't think about these marvelous landscapes with water and waterfalls, and think about empty spaces where the music of people laughing, where ceremony, where food is not there anymore. Think about these empty spaces. And so Sierra Club is trying to address this history. We are not going to change history, but we are going to revise how we address these things and how we elevate the voice of other people, not only Indigenous, but Black people as well, in the history of what it means diversity in the outdoors. And that's a little bit of my personal story as an immigrant working on both sides of the border. I was the scientist, I was the expert, I wrote the papers, I did the media interviews, and yet when we crossed the border, I was the only one harassed by the Border Patrol. I was the only one having to carry extra documents to show where I'm from and to really show that I know what I'm doing and that I'm employed. I have been under the gun, I have been threatened by the Border Patrol because I'm a brown person with a backpack and an accent, working out there in remote places where I'm looking for the species that I've studied. So there's a lot of my identity that has clashed with this idea of science. And so now I work to decolonize my own brain, see myself in my own identity, and try to give space to the voices of other people. And for that matter, it's a reciprocal relationship I have, for example, with Verna, for whom building that page gave me a voice. Building Verna's page for Native women made me see myself in those places, made me see myself as a runner more than just sport. And so I think it goes in all directions when we have these efforts and we benefit each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that, Sergio, and your personal experiences and what you advocate for. Really appreciate it. And going off those lines, there's another question we had for you all about how do you view and connect to the outdoors? Because we all have a different relationship and the way that we view it. So we just kind of wanted to get a sense of that before moving forward. If Allison can pull that up. And I think in the meantime, we're gonna go, I think, until maybe 6:15, 6:30, which is Mountain Time. I apologize, this is Mountain Time that I'm in. So I forgot to mention, if you have any questions for the panelists throughout, I think I'm gonna ask one here in a little bit. Please put that in the chat box or the Q&A box and we'll get to those as well. So we would love to hear what you all are curious about. So what is your connection view of the outdoors? Is it recreation, national park, city parks, community garden, agriculture? Again, we don't have probably some answers here. You can put other, or you can put it in the chat box as well, and the way you view it. I think also going off the lines of I think diversity, and I think Sergio mentioned this. Okay, here we go. Interesting. So recreation is 66%. National parks kind of goes down the line. Yeah. And then other, we'd like to hear what other means. If you all want to share what that means for you and your connection and view of the outdoors, that would be great. So I wanted to mention something that Sergio brought up is highlighting different voices as well. I understand that we might be highlighting certain voices in this panel that you might have not heard from. We are aware of other programs and initiatives, and we want to give a shout out to them too, you know, including Natives Outdoors. They're doing a lot of great work about advocating for Natives to be outdoors and their apparel, a Native owned company. There's Indigenous Woman Hike. Yeah. Native Woman Running. And I found some other ones. There's Native Woman Wilderness. And these are all on Instagram if you're on there. I think they all have websites as well you can look up. Brown People Camping. And some of these initiatives and accounts started because of this issue. We're not seeing enough diversity in the outdoors, or enough women, or enough, yeah, basically diversity in the outdoors. So that's one of the reasons why some of these accounts and initiatives have started. And so we're taking it in our own hands and advocating for that. I think I'm going to ask a question that came in from Tom Martin. He asked, when we speak of diversity on the river, is there more to it than diversity in the workforce of employees working for all white concessionaire owners, where the almost all white clientele pay up to $700 a night to be guided? Keith's photo of the Jim Dandy Ski Club in the commercial world is very, very rare. Can you all speak to ways to increase diversity on the river among commercial passengers, owners, and do-it-yourself river runners? I guess there's like 2 questions in there. So I don't know if Keith, do you have any thoughts to share?
Yeah, when it comes to commercial clients down in Grand Canyon, that's a real tough one to address. So it is changing over the years. I've seen our clientele down in Grand Canyon become more and more racially diverse over time. But that photo of the Jim Dandy Ski Club is, like Tom Martin said, is very rare. That was the only time in my entire history as a guide that I ever had a boat full of people that were non-white. And so I don't, it's hard to say. For me, the issue is more about the guiding community down there and how culturally and ethnically homogenous that group of people is. But and there are ways to change that, and I'd be happy to offer up a couple ideas. But in terms of our clientele, I think it is changing over time, because more and more people are starting to learn about different ways to experience nature, and so there we go.
Mm-hmm. I think this goes into a question, and I think part of this purpose of this panel is if you all can offer ways and actions or initiatives, ideas for some of the people tuning in of how we all can be more inclusive and diverse within the outdoors. But I think it also goes beyond the outdoors as well. And so I don't know if you all want to share any thoughts around that. And that might be useful for the people listening in.
I'll jump in. So one thing I'm thinking is, for everybody here, let's not get stuck on the fact that we're talking about national parks and then it's the government, and then we say, well, the government needs to change that. Think about your own grocery store, your own church, your own community, your own group of friends. Think about your own surroundings and how diverse the people in your own surroundings are or not, and what you can do to change that. Because it's very easy to put it on the national parks to fix the problem. It's very easy to put it on a magazine to just fix the problem, or in an organization to fix the problem. This is the very first step that I would say, is that people need to address self-transformation. You need to learn all the things that you don't know. There's a lot of things that you don't know. And precisely because we don't have those hard conversations, You don't know how to have those conversations. So start having those conversations. And more importantly, if you're not BIPOC, listen to those conversations. You need to listen. Don't try to overtake those conversations to tell people of color what racism is. Don't try to tell people of color what microaggressions mean. Don't try to explain to people, to women, why the sexual harassment is on them. So instead of that, you need to listen on those events and why those events happen, those experiences. And so you can start changing a little bit of the way you think. One thing that I suggest is that diversity is important in order to have, and I'm the one who wrote a collection because I wanted to make a point in that answer. Diversity is a collection because you have a lot of colors, you have a diversity of people, you have a diversity of food, you have a diversity of cultures, but they can all be sitting at the table and not speak. There can be only one speaking, and that's what happens, is that even if you have diversity, there's the dominating culture always dominating the narrative, dominating the conversation, dominating mansplaining how things are, whitesplaining. And so move further from, whitesplaining, from diversity, move to inclusivity or inclusion, where not only they are sitting together in the table, everybody's heard, everybody's opinion matters, everybody's values come to the table at the same time, everybody's values are the same. Scientific values are not more important than traditional ecological values. So you need to set inclusion and equity in order to have a system in yourself, in your family, in your community that allows people to express themselves, to share their diversity, not just to show their diversity, but to speak their diversity. And that will help you have a much better understanding of what that means, not just have a collection of people. So I would say diversify your sources, diversify what you read, diversify the authors, diversify your role models. If you only read books or magazines by white people, I challenge you to not read white people for 1 year. I challenge you to not read cisgender heterosexual men. I challenge you to vote for Indigenous people running for office today who will know how to address the challenges of their communities. So that is where diversity will come in, and inclusion by giving them a voice. And it's only one idea, but it's something I wanted to share.
Yeah, along those lines, Sergio, I was wondering if you can speak to an article or a blog that you wrote, Running Towards Justice. If you can share that link in the chat box, but I'm going to share my screen here. And I really liked what Sergio had to share in here at the end of the article. Not just only sharing his experience, but then giving some items for you all to think about. If you want to speak to that, Sergio, that would be great. Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, I'll read it from there. Thank you. So I wrote this as a personal experience of fear for my life, as a personal experience of fear from the police, as a person who felt unseen by my own community. And so at the end of everything that I explained, I share that first, the most important part is self-transformation. You need to start thinking in a different way and take away the white supremacy culture that we all have in one way or another. This is why I bring up my Western traditional education of college and books and all of that, because that gave me a way of thinking that did not allow me to see outside of that. So take those sunglasses off, work on self-transformation, educate yourself. Today, more than ever with social media, you have the sources of information much more easier to reach than we did a few years ago. The other thing that you need to know is, please stop saying that you don't see color. We're all the same, we're all humans. I don't see color, I just see the human race. No, we need you to see color. We need you to see color because precisely this is why Black Lives Matter, because Black lives are under assault by police violence and state-sanctioned violence, and we need to address it specifically for Black people. this is not a competition between seeing who is suffering most, but to address the specific issues that every community goes through. So you need to learn about murder and missing Indigenous women as an issue that affects Indigenous communities in this country, in Canada, in Mexico, and throughout the world. So when you see color, you are able to see people for who they are, for what their culture is, their language, and also for what threats exist to their lives. You also need to work on equity and inclusion. It's a point I made earlier about not only working on diversity, but actually addressing equity and inclusion to give everybody a voice and value of their voice. And then work on making people feel that they belong in the place where you are holding them, in a river trip, in a hike, in your church, in your grocery store, wherever you go. Work to make people feel comfortable, not like they fit in. They don't have to look like you. They don't have to wear the same clothes as you, but make them feel welcome and comfortable. And that will help you create experiences that enrich your life and diversify your own life. And the other one I just mentioned is that diversify your role models. I was just in a panel at a college yesterday, a remote panel yesterday, and the students share their heroes and sheroes, and they only thought about 5 people. 5 people is what I heard. They were all white and 4 were men. And so you need to start breaking that narrative, like start seeing other people, see the queer community as heroes and sheroes, see other people as people who can inspire you and are doing things today, even if they don't write the book, even if they don't speak in the conference. There are people working today to defend the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. There is the Wichin Nation, and specifically Verna puts her life on the line to defend the calving grounds of caribou in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, to defend it from oil and gas extraction. There is also Nellie Jo David, an O'odham woman who puts herself on the line of the US-Mexico border in O'odham lands to defend her land and her water from the construction of a border wall. So those are heroes and sheroes you need to know of today, and forget and stop glorifying John Muir, stop glorifying the old authors of the Southwest who created a narrative that is not serving our communities today.
Great, thank you, thank you. I think those are really good points that you added to your blog there. Verna or Nizhooni, if you want to share anything about some ways that, some of the people tuning in or outdoor companies, brands could go beyond just providing backpacks or beyond, including you in an interview. I think you both have experience with that. If you can speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I really like, Sergio, all your suggestions there. I am like Miles from everything that happened with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And as a runner, I noticed that a lot of companies were posting the black box on their social media, saying that we support, BIPOC people and we're going to be there for them. I was really hesitant about that because I wanted to know that you meant that there was substance behind that. So it's very important that industries, communities, whatever organizations have substance behind that, because I'm watching and I'm seeing people who are wanting that. I think also just giving us a seat at the table. And I think also we talk about this, about us writing the stories, sharing the stories. If I'm talking about something, I want to write the story from my perspective as an Indigenous woman, and sharing that platform with other people is very important. I think it's also important for the industry organizations to pay BIPOC people. I'm kind of learning this too, because I want, just out of the kindness of my heart. But I think our voices really matter, and that I hope that everything that right now diversity inclusion is not a trend, and that people will see that we are real people who love the outdoors, who love running, who love doing all these recreational things, and we want to find a belonging. So I think those things I feel like are key, and also to make everyone part of that narrative, that story, and that we are all gatekeepers to our people or these stories. So I feel like those are important things that I suggest.
Mhm. Yeah, great. Thank you. Nizhooni?
Yes, I would love to add that I think even going beyond a seat at the table, I would say that it's even more than having a voice or an interview at the table, but I think it's really, well, what action is going to happen after you have that voice at the table? Because we've all been invited to interviews, we've all talked on panels, beyond, more than panels like this, or this is community driven, but it's like, I think that there's more to it than just, because I think we've all been invited to the room. I think a black box on Instagram is like being invited to the room. And, I think maybe we're kind of moving to the point of like, now we're having a seat at the table. We're not the guests that are standing by the door in a really full room. But to be able to even be leading these meetings and people that are willing to drive that change. And then I think another thing that I would add as well is I like the term BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, but I think that there is still yet more to include of, I guess, understanding that like we are all so different and diverse. And so having one Black person and one Indigenous person might not cut it. Also, I think saying, oh, well, we have all Native people, now we have all people of color. And it's like, but you don't have all people of color. You're not really representing everyone. And to also understand that Indigenous people have very different experiences, especially Indigenous people of the states are dealing with sovereignty issues and all of those types of things. And that might be different than other people of color. And so sometimes it's like creating this whole bucket of people of color. It's not the same, where some people might get pulled over and some people are passing and they don't get pulled over, but they're still the people of color that are being validated in some of these spaces. White passing people of color versus Black people, where there is always, to me, it's like there's always a line of who really gets invited and who's actually invited and who's acceptable for people, who's a more digestible type of Black or brown person. Mm-hmm. And that is quite frustrating. And so I think that is something important to understand and stuff too, is like, all the black boxes and all this kind of stuff, like that's good. But then are you gonna, I don't know, it's like, are you gonna drive all your attention to every other person of color except Black people? Then I don't know why you're posting that box. It doesn't make any sense. Because this is a very specific issue. It's about Black lives mattering. And we all know that doesn't mean it takes away from anybody else. So that is something that I would include.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for bringing those points up, especially around Indigenous peoples or Native people, that we're diverse. We're diverse people. We have a diverse culture and diverse perspectives. I know I've been approached a number of times about my views as a Diné person, but I have to make it clear that I'm speaking from my own experience. I don't speak for all Diné people or all Indigenous peoples. This is just what I have been taught and the knowledge that I carry with me. It might be similar to other Indigenous people, but it's not representing all Indigenous people. So I'm glad you brought that up. And also, I think part of it and why I wanted to do this panel and conversation around this is that black box on Instagram, or those statements that were coming out about, we support Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter. We're listening and learning to, what's happening. But I think one of the questions I had is like, do you really understand or know what that means? Or you know, what can you do, or what have you done as an organization, a company, and a business, and challenging those statements that you're all putting out there. So this is why we wanted, one of the reasons for having this conversation. So thank you all for tuning in and listening to us. And Keith, I don't know if you want to add to that. I think you had challenged one of the statements that was put on Facebook a while back, and maybe you already spoke to some of it, but what do you think are some ways and actions that organizations, companies can take to be more diverse and inclusive?
Well, I think what Sergio said is right to the point. You have to start with yourself. And, you know, this wasn't a scientific analysis, but when I saw those black boxes start to go up, and I started to write some things to the different organizations that I saw putting those black boxes up, and started speaking out about my own experience as a guide down in Grand Canyon. One of the things that I did is I went on to the social media accounts of all of my guiding friends. And one thing that I noticed about their account, about the people that they were connected to, is that they were connected to people that were very much like them. It was very white, and it was very much people that are connected to the outdoors. And so much more than my other friends, my friends that are here in Tucson that are engaged in the community in a different way. So hopefully this will start to make sense here, hopefully in a second. So what I'm trying to say is I noticed that the friend groups that all of my friends had that were connected to the outdoors, that were guiding, were very homogenous. And from the time I was 20 until I was 30, I was really into climbing and mountain biking and rafting and all that stuff. And as it turned out, all of my friends were very homogenous. There was very white people that were engaged in those activities. And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I started participating in activities that broadened, that diversified the people that I was connected to. And through those different activities, I was connected to Indigenous people and to Black people and to a lot of other people that, because of my interests prior to that, I was never exposed to. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that it starts, like Sergio said, with yourself, just diversifying your interests, diversifying the information that's coming in, the people that you're connected to. And once that starts to happen, because, you know, in my experience, the guiding community is very insular, especially down in Grand Canyon. So the people that you turn on to the thing that you love are the people that are closest to you. And so that is why, for instance, the guiding community down in Grand Canyon is so homogenous. And so if the people that you love and that you're closest to are more diverse, then we're going to start to see that diversity start to come up in organizations, you know, like the Grand Canyon River Guides or in the outdoors in general. So that's what I'm trying to say.
That resonates with me so much, Colleen. I feel like when I was just focused on the scientific part of my work, my career, then my friends were mostly scientists. Their knowledge was science-based. They were all white. And conversations started getting really boring. Like you would go out with them somewhere and we still having the staff meeting that we were having 3 hours. And I know some of you are in this talk, and I'm glad you're listening to this, because it took me actively removing myself from the conservation community. I had an interview about why I moved from conservation to social justice. Is because as soon as I stepped out of that world, I started having friends from so many different backgrounds and understanding of other life. In 3 years, I've made more friends and more diverse friends than in the last 15 that I've been in the United States. And it took me stepping away from some of those friends and telling them, no, I'm finding new friends. I don't want to hang out with you anymore.
Yes, it's true. Really looking at yourself and the issues that you're working on, but also the your workplace and what it represents, you know. I wanted to get to a few questions from the audience. One is from Marissa. The question is, what is most important to you in creating a compelling connection for people to act on that is tied to life-changing experiences?
Could you ask that question again, Colleen, please?
Well, I'm trying to, I guess, understand the question. First of all, it says, what is most important to you in creating a compelling connection for people to act on that is tied to life-changing experiences?
That's complex, but I will say that when you see that the lives of people are at risk, that people are being killed, that people are under serious oppression, that people are marginalized, that people are redlined, when you see that people are the victim of behaviors and systems of oppression, that's been when, to me, it might not affect my own privilege, but if I see affecting other people, then I'm going to work on that. But the other broader answer to that is that there is no one thing that I think is the most important. This is not a cooking recipe where you put 3 elements together and mix them and all of a sudden you're very diverse and equitable. You need to work on yourself every day, and then you will answer that question 3 years later. But right now, that question, what it's saying is, I don't know what I don't know. How do I know what I don't know? Well, you need to expose to other experiences and learn from other people and start seeing where you are in that world and how you connect to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's another question from Amy Kaplan. Isn't the framing of the outdoors as a commodity that people go and partake in problematic in and of itself because it's based on the history of colonization? Yes. Go ahead, Nizhooni.
I think as a little anecdote I have to that of just like, how do we define outdoors and understanding the history of it as well. And I think that I would agree, yes. And it's hard to kind of walk around that language of, you know, the great outdoors, and we have to just be in the great outdoors. And I think that that speaks to that binary as well. And a recent experience that I had was working with some donors that were a part of our Elk has purchased land in our very inner city neighborhood. It used to be a park and ride with a lot of shootings and just lots of things going on. And now there's land that Elk is regenerating. We're working to get to mimic a prairie and to have some native grasses there and just to be a refuge for our students. And I think one of our donors asked me, oh, well, have you had experiences in places like this? Or have you ever had access to anything like this before? And I didn't really understand what he was asking. The way I took it was that I don't, because I live in such a inner city type neighborhood, that we wouldn't have access to those types of things. And I think that to me, that's still bringing up that binary of, well, what's outdoors and what's in your neighborhood. And I told him, I said, well, I'm not unfamiliar to land. Like, I grew up visiting my grandma and traveling with my Navajo family on the res. I forgot to mention, my grandma's from Nahiłii, New Mexico. Nahiłii. In my mind, I saw a badger. Nahiłii means badger in Navajo, and Nahiłii is the I guess the white man's interpretation of that. But you know, going there and visiting my family, and from my grandpa showing me just one little flower, and I've had that flower in my mind forever because he said, oh, you can eat the nectar out of it. And I said, oh, well, I got to keep finding this. And knowing that we always have had experiences like that, or if it's just picking the worms in the dirt in my mom's backyard when I was little, all of those things matter. And I think that that still kind of can combat this idea of always having to be in the great outdoors. And
Right.
I think that it's even when you are walking into the great outdoors, and then now you have to have a $100 backpack that says Marmot on it. Now I have to have these certain shoes. I can't hike in slides, in my Nike slides. You know, I can't wear a hoodie. I have to have Gore-Tex. And I think that that still sets it up and can probably still reinforce a lot of those themes with colonization. And I think sometimes it's okay to just go for a walk. You don't have to always go for a hike. Go for a walk and just look at the birds or the little chipmunks and just admire them and not have to feel like you have to be conquering something. Because I think that that's another narrative in the outdoor world, is we're always having to conquer things. I have to get to the top of this mountain. Why couldn't you just walk on the trail? I felt that so much in college, where I was like, I don't want to hang out with a lot of these people. And so then it's like, do I want to hang out with the really outdoorsy white kids, or do I want to go with the Black and brown kids, where we're like, we don't know what we're doing, and just, you know, being stupid but having fun. And, you know, it's like I can go in both places, but it was like I'm so tired of being out hiked by people, or feeling like we're always on a rush. Everything is about time. How fast is this happening? Are we getting there on time? Or is it happening? Are we there on time? And it's like, if the sun is not down, I think we're okay. But yeah, there's a lot to say about that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think we have a lot of personal experience to share in that sense. And yeah, you know, growing up on the res, it's like we're outside every day as kids and just playing in the dirt and climbing the sandstone. But, you know, that's been, I guess, more seen in a different way. It's like rock climbing. You need to have climbing shoes. You need to have gear with that, but it's like, not really. You can just go, you know, I take my niece and nephew and their friends, and they love to climb the boulders. And I'm just like, yeah, go for it, do it. Just watch each other, you know, make sure you can all see each other. So yeah, I think it's just seen in a different light and in a different way, where these outdoor brands are, yeah, they're trying to sell a product to us, and saying, you know, this is what you need, this is the latest gear, and so that's what it represents, you know, for some people. But I think we're gonna wind down and close out this panel, but I wanted you all to and maybe answer the question yourselves as well. And we're gonna do this via the poll again, where you get to answer it on your own. Is, what are ways that you can that you have or can support diversity, equity, and inclusion moving forward, now that you've heard from the panelists here? So we want to hear from you now. So we'll just do the same poll. You can click on the link. I don't know if Allison can share that link again in the chat box, and then we can have you all answer and see what you all can come up with.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
Amy Kaplan just commented that the outdoors is a product, and then the previous question was how the outdoors relates to colonization. And the first thing I thought about is how Black people were a product. That they were, of course, we refer to, you know, those ancestors as enslaved people, but they were objects, they were slaves. That's a product. It's a product for exploitation. And thinking about how, I don't know, just a small connection between that of what is considered a product and how it can become exploited. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And here, I mean, these are maybe things that you're gonna possibly work towards individually or collectively within your own organizations or companies. Maybe I've heard some speaking over the last few months with different people, thinking about maybe a scholarship fund for people to get trained to become guides maybe, or what was another one? I don't know, some sort of creative strategic plan maybe, or I know some organizations have what they refer to as a JEDI coalition. I think that stands for justice. Actually, I don't know. Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. Is that right, Sergio? Okay, yeah. So yeah, I mean, what can you do beyond that as well if you already have some of those things in place now that you've heard what the panelists had to share here? Paid internships, diversify my life. Okay, some great feedback. Foster the relationships and experiences with other people that enrich both their lives. Being open. Great. Can scroll back down. Continue to invite family, friends. Reading from diverse authors. I know, thank you all for sharing some authors in the chat box. And if you have any other, know of any other, I think I mentioned a couple accounts you can follow, or a couple programs like Indigenous Women Hike, Natives Outdoors. If you have any other ones that you want to share, put it in the chat box as well. Red Earth Running Company, yes.
Can I say something about that, Colleen?
Sure.
I think one of the things, I appreciate people asking for books, and I appreciate people sharing books, but also understand that books in this continent, in this context, are a colonial way of communication. So whereas you're trying to diversify your information, you're still looking for the same way of communication. So it's more important to go explore experiences, go learn from experiences. Don't try to learn about Indigenous communities from books that were written by white people. Go have experiences with Indigenous communities, Indigenous people, wherever, or whatever other group of people it is. Create a relationship, foster an experience that fits both, and break the idea that everything you learn only comes from a book. Break that idea that the only learning only happens in school. Break that idea that the only people who teach you are professors. Like, we learn from our grandmas and our aunties. We learn from people, again, in the grocery store and in your church and in your own community. So books are fine, but please also learn a different way. There's people who with a lot of knowledge that want to share that have never written a book. And for that matter, for example, learning about Indigenous Peoples Day and why there is a move to remove Columbus Day, that is a way for you to learn about communities. Learn about Juneteenth and why it is an important date, and the 19th of June for Black people. That's a way to learn about Black communities and Black history, but not everything is in books. So please try to have personal relationships that allow you to learn and allow other people to learn from you too.
Yes, thank you for making that point. Yeah, the oral teachings and knowledge is also very important. I think with that, unless we have the panelists want to share any last thoughts, and thank you all for tuning in. This will definitely it's being recorded, and we're gonna have it included in a Google Drive folder with other resources. I know some people had shared some resources here. Thank you for that. So I'm going to compile that and put that in the Google Drive folder for you all. But yeah, I want to pass it on to Verna, Keith, or Nizhooni for any last thoughts, comments to this conversation.
I think we've covered a lot of ground.
It's a lot. I mean, we can talk about this, continue to talk about this, but we wanted to, provide more than just like education and awareness and experience. As like, okay, but what do you do with that, right? So that's why I had asked you all, the panelists here, to talk about ways individuals and companies, businesses could be more diverse and inclusive, because that's really the next step. And then beyond that, right? And for you all to, people tuning in to share that as well, what you think we need to do collectively. So I think with that, thank you. Thank you so much to Verna and Keith and Sergio and Nizhooni, and really appreciate your time and the words that you have to share and all that you do. I mean, it's very important, really appreciative. And thank you all for tuning in from wherever you were tuning in from. Really appreciate your time listening in and joining in the conversation.
Thank you, Colleen, for organizing this, for putting this together and putting us together. And thanks to Allison and Amy for running the tech and for everybody to be here.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.